Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and the person in my ear is also Joe Devine. We're experiencing technical difficulties today, and I can hear everything I'm saying in my own ears. It's not off-putting at all, as I say, joined by JJ Bull the Bullard.
I'm going to have to take my earphone out so I can hear what I'm saying when I talk to you, Joe. Hello, quack, quack.
Hello. And hello to the other JJ. Oh, also here is Jonathan Ross Dog Mackenzie. Hi, John.
Hello.
You can't hear an echo, can you?
No.
No, we're the patsies to your fawning love fest. Is that right? I don't know. Right. Guten Tag, Herr Stafford-Bloor. Wie geht's du?
Guten Tag, Herr Devine. How are you?
I don't know. Can you hear yourself twice?
No, not at all.
Well, then I'm not good at all. Right, let's play this podcast game where we talk about football. And I'm just going to... Don't say anything, Seb, because I'm going to... Oh, that's so much better. I'm a normal person again. I've removed my headphones, listeners. Everything's going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. There's lots to discuss today, isn't there? There's so much. I'm in a terrible mood. We've got VAR. Manchester United, they beat Arsenal. We'll discuss that, even though Steve Hanku tried to bury it at the back end of the podcast. We've brought it to the front, Steve. Thank you very much. The Merseyside derby, very exciting. So much interesting there. And of course, also other games of football that happened. Plus a bit more Freddos, because everyone liked that. So that we, do more of what people want, isn't it? When people indicate a want, we'll fill that want.
That's how all the good businesses work, isn't it? They make things that they think people want, not supply something that they think would be good for them to get into.
That's true, yeah.
It's anti what Steve Jobs did.
I prefer the second one of those.
I think Steve Jobs did well.
Well, I mean, more of that later. We'll talk about on your Steve Jobs business podcast.
It's a chapter,
with John
me and John's business,
exactly.
of course.
Anyway, I don't know what's happening, but if you want to know what's happening, you should visit The Athletic. theathletic.com/Tifo. theathletic.com/Tifo, where all of the best football analysis and news can be found. I believe you can get a 30-day free trial if you visit theathletic.com/Tifo. And if you do that, I guarantee you, I don't guarantee you because I think that's like business language that you're not supposed to use, but I guarantee you that you'll like it. I think. Yeah? I guarantee you that I think you'll like it. Anyway, for now I will leave you in the warm hands and the cool embrace of myself in my own ear.
It's really hard.
Yes, VAR. Let's discuss VAR first. But don't worry, listeners, because we're going to do it in an interesting way. We've got a comment here from David Beaton. David Beaton says on YouTube, Tifo team, on the next podcast, it'd be great if you could discuss VAR and the interpretation of the offside rule. I'm not a Liverpool nor Everton fan, but I'm sitting here watching the Merseyside derby, and I've witnessed yet another goal chalked off because of part of a player was mere centimetres past the last defender. I've got sort of thoughts about offside. Maybe we can discuss that too. There have been multiple goals disallowed this season because of minuscule margins of offside, and I'm pretty sure that was never really the spirit of the rule, and think we should be advocating more for goals and not taking them away, or for more goals and not taking them away. It's an interesting week to discuss it, Seb, largely because there were a couple, one quite standout, very, very bad VAR call, which I don't think anybody really understands.
Well, there's a couple. Do you mean the one at Newcastle, Joe?
Oh, no, I mean the West Ham one. What was the one at Newcastle about?
Well, so the one at Newcastle is Newcastle had a goal disallowed because Tyreek Mitchell pushed an opponent into his own goalkeeper. And
it's quite funny.
It's funny, but you'd be raging if that was given against your team.
Well, I have a big take on this as well, just to jump in immediately, is that to me looks like they're trying to make it so you can't, you're allowed to be physical in the when you're playing, right? So they're trying to make that a thing. But if that, because he pushes him a little bit, he nudges him because he's running at pace, so that's enough to send him flying into the goalie and wipes him out like a bowling ball, which is, again, funny. But
I think we're missing the funniest part, which is the ball then bounces off Tyreek Mitchell into the net, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I can see why that has been disallowed with VAR, because it adheres to the thing they're trying to do this season where you're allowing more physicality in it. So maybe he should be stronger and not off balance when he's being nudged into his own goalkeeper, attempting and flying like a bowling ball.
For sure. I was talking about the West Ham one though, Seb. The West Ham one was including Jared Bowen and Edouard Mendy.
Yeah, it's a really strange incident. So basically, Reece James misplaces a back pass, underhits it. Jared Bowen tries to beat Edouard Mendy to the ball. Mendy gets there, but kind of parries it back out, and Maxwell Cornet then scores. But in the challenge, Jared Bowen it's unclear as to how much contact he actually makes on Mendy, but boot touches him. Mendy goes down in agony, apparently, and lies there. The play develops, Cornet scores, and this is in, I think, the 91st minute, and it's an equaliser. And the referee disallows it, having consulted with having been sort of directed to the VAR screen, and it's not really clear as to why. I've seen obviously lots of stills on the old social media showing that, in fact, Jared Bowen studded him in the chest, punched him in the face, two-footed him in.
I think let's be fair. He sort of scrapes Edouard Mendy's ribs with his leg, and one of the suggestions from the commentary team early on was, did he dangle a leg there, as they say? Dangle a leg being, of course, the language for did he leave the leg there on purpose in order to leave a bit on him? I'm not sure. You could say either way whether he did that. Probably not, and I think we can assume innocence in this case. My sort of thoughts about this were that Edouard Mendy was never, ever getting back to the goal to save that, whether or not he was touched by another player. So I think, unless you can see something like aggressively provoked foul, I don't really understand what scenario. Why are you laughing? What are you laughing at?
I'm watching the disallowed Newcastle goal.
Right.
It makes me laugh. Sorry.
Anyway, John, let me ask you this. When it comes to VAR, lots of people thought, the decisions. Let's not talk about those. Lots of people thought it was going to make everything better, and that we wouldn't have to have these conversations anymore. And that really hasn't happened. It's just sort of moved the bar a little bit further down, so that the conversations that we're having now seem to be had with like an almost obscene level of abstractness and nuance, right?
Yeah, it's really a lesson in unintended consequences, right? Because no one really thought about what the impact of having technology as a form of refereeing, what the consequences of that would be. And I think as we're finding out, it's much more complicated than simply just saying, every time you watch something back, it suddenly immediately becomes clear what's happened and we all make the right decision. So I think there's two issues. One is that when you introduce something like technology, people expect perfection, and I just don't think that's possible, because as we've said, I mean, take the Jared Bowen instance, right? Jared Bowen, even if he's dangling a leg there, he's looking for a penalty. But how many times do players look for penalties, not get the penalty, but it's not just given as a foul the other way anyway? So I think it's, even if he has left his leg in, it's weird how when you view that in a replay situation, suddenly you're like, well, Jared Bowen is the perpetrator of the crime here rather than the keeper jumping in. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think we've now arrived with two different contexts for every decision. One is that we've got certain decisions which are black and white. So you've got offside decisions, you've got goal line technology decisions, and those are, you look at the tape and you can see if it's offside or not, right? We can talk about until the cows come home about whether or not that's what we should be doing, but that's what you can do. The other thing then is that you have fouls and penalties, and the problem there is that you're now moving from a black and white situation to a very, very subjective situation. And when you bring those two contexts together, you have on the one hand referees making like toenail decisions on offsides and it being that picky, to then these situations where it's subjective and people feel as though like all offsides now become ridiculous, but no penalty decision is being overturned. And so I think when you bring those two contexts together, it just makes a really unsatisfying situation for all the fans, because you feel as though you've got pickiness on one side, nothing changing on the other in terms of the actual things we wanted overturning, right? We wanted to see more penalties given because referees were bolder about calling them. And I think you just bring everything together and the result is just a mishmash of things, and no one actually feels satisfied.
There was one other incident as well that occurred in the Aston Villa-Manchester City game, which is it's clear cut that it shouldn't have been given as a goal, obviously, because the whistle is blown. But Coutinho comes back from being, I think, slightly or just offside. If it was fractions, and actually on a replay it suggested that perhaps he wasn't. And he comes around, he picks the ball up, the argument being offside, comes back behind the defenders, so with the defenders now between him and the goal, and scores like a lovely deflected goal that the keeper has no chance of saving, but the whistle's already blown for offside in a situation where you think, maybe we always thought we should wait, and everybody stopped playing. And I think not only is that goal possibly going in anyway, you can't now make the argument that it definitely would because Man City players stopped a fraction of a second before. But also, I would say that Philippe Coutinho, even if he does pick the ball up in a fraction of an offside position, he brings it back on the side and then takes an incredible shot from outside the goal where he no longer has any advantage of picking it up in an offside position. I think that should be allowed.
But then you're gaining an advantage by being ahead of the defender in the first place. So there is that argument. So I agree with John that it becomes almost like you can have these decisions done like that if you're playing a game of FIFA because everyone's digital. And so you can then, like, the computer works out accurately. But in real life, you probably need a bit of maybe subjectivity into it. I think anytime you score a wonder goal, you should just be like,
just let it
go.
There's a McAllister goal.
McAllister goal, right? Everyone's going, it's one of the all-time great Premier League goals. It's not. There was who's that boy? It's Philip Billing punted one in from like 25 yards on the weekend. It was amazing. It was
lovely, yeah.
It was so good, right? McAllister's a really, really good goal.
I believe the commentator said top billing.
That's good. I like that. But this is the thing. So you get that with it. And you think, well, it was, I can't remember who's going for the overhead. Is it Caicedo goes for the overhead kick or something like that? I can't remember who does it, but misses the overhead kick. He's still infringing of a play, but you think, well, it's probably allow that, but you have to have it in. And to be clear, I really like VAR. It's coming into Scotland soon as well, and that will be amazing because you think the standard refereeing is poor in England? Whoa, baby, let me show you a different. Not even a kettle of fish. It's like an oven of fish.
Right, a whole oven.
It's a whole oven full of fish.
It sounds delicious.
It's bizarre. Yeah.
This is the irony because obviously I support a club who were in the Championship for a long time, and Championship refereeing is so much worse than Premier League refereeing, and I think you just sort of have to accept that the Premier League and the top 5 leagues do have the best referees. They do end up there.
I don't think any other league exists. Let's talk about Manchester United 3-1 Arsenal. Actually, a very entertaining game. JJ, you covered this for Tifo IRL over the weekend.
Yes.
I mean, it's a 4th straight win for Manchester United. It's Arsenal's first loss of the... Yeah, I'm going to take my headphone off as well. It's Arsenal's first loss of the season. A very entertaining clash between the two. An interesting tactical battle as well.
I think this was... I think Arsenal looked really good. And in the analysis we do, I'd say far more than that because that's not really enough to justify an entire video. But Arsenal look really well coached. The system works. They have players that suit the system properly. They're well balanced. But when you play that sort of football, if you don't get the luck, you don't take your chances. I think Arteta said this after the game, is that if you don't, when you have the dominant spells, if you don't take your chances, you don't win. Like, you have to kill the game then and there when you have them on the ropes. And Guardiola used to talk about this all the time. It's the killer instinct they lacked. And he wanted players in, because you can coach players to get it, but some players don't have that killer instinct knack, but maybe it'll come over time with Arsenal as they grow into it. United...
Look, can I ask you a question about United?
Yes.
Because one of the sort of bits of analysis after the game, and lots of people talking about it, were saying it was a counter-attacking victory. And for sure, United's second 2 of their 3 goals were counter-attacking. The first goal came after 18 passes and the ball going all the way up and back and all the way back up the pitch again in quite an intricate way. And it happened not too long after a period in the first half where Manchester United played in a way against a top 6 team that I haven't seen them do for a decade.
Yeah, I think you can see there's clearly been worked on in the training ground, particularly with shape and positioning, so players know where to be and when. So that it's not players are. I think maybe Ten Hag would want his players to have a certain level of freedom in the final third, but in all the stages before that, phases of play before, players know where to be and when. Like the goal Anthony scores is because he's holding position wide right, which drags players out of position. They have to leave him alone. So when he becomes active later in the move, he's not really had someone next to him. I think you see it in build-up as well, like they form a 3 at times with the left-back pushing up, so it's Sancho coming inside. Basically what you're seeing is very clear structure, which they've maybe lacked. And what they've done is also bring in players who can make that work. So like Rangnick could probably have done this. Solskjær could probably have done something similar and put players in the right places. They had they've had high-quality coaches there for a long time. Like Kieran McKenna's doing well at Ipswich, and you've got McPhelan was there before.
Sure.
But it's not the same as
the difference is Christian Eriksen and Alexander Martinez, right?
That's exactly it. You see, the passes that Martinez is playing out from the back are progressive. So you have normal passes, which is like 5 to 10 yards. Progressive or over 10, I think is what the definition is. But basically, rather than going for the guy in midfield short, you're going for the guy further out, either a diagonal past the wing or into someone like Fernandes dropping from a 10 space to maybe one of the half spaces either side of him to receive the ball. So you can get the ball from back to front really quickly. And what they were doing was bypassing Arsenal's entire press and midfield with one pass. Did it only like 3 times, but that's enough to give you chances.
They scored 3 goals.
Scored 3 goals. Eriksen, amazing. If you watch the highlights back of this one, you'll see Eriksen being able to turn, and he must have already scanned before he receives the ball. But when you watch him in the actual play, he doesn't look for a good couple of seconds before he receives it, and then just turns and pings it, knowing exactly where Fernandes will be, and it again splits the defense in 2. It's really, really clever, and it's a lot of coaching from Ten Hag. It's also having the quality of technical players who can do that. Fred can't do that. McTominay can't do that. And so that means suddenly you've got this ability to go from defence to attack within midfield rather than having them there as people who disrupt play and are just protectors.
Well, Seb, there was. I'll come to you, John.
I was just going to follow on
you go now. Hold on, you start talking.
It feels like
now you start talking now.
I feel as though there's a lot of discourse about Ole Gunnar Solskjær and Erik ten Hag, right? Because a lot of Manchester United fans just want to be like, okay, Ole Gunnar Solskjær did this. You know, they played direct counter-attacking football, and that's basically what Manchester United need to do. And I think there's a lot of people who want to distance Erik ten Hag from Ole Gunnar Solskjær because there's definitely differences between what they were doing. And I think a lot of it comes down, as you say, to structure. It's about thinking about how do I get my players in the best situations so that we can do a couple of things. One is being able to attack in the best way possible, but also I think being able to defend really well. And I think that's where Ole Gunnar Solskjær wasn't good. So with Erik ten Hag, what you get is you get more of an idea of like pressing higher up the pitch and trying to win the ball back and generate short transitions from there, which I don't think we saw with Ole Gunnar Solskjær. But also in terms of like the defensive transitions, Manchester United are just so much better at defending those transitions, or that they will do with Erik ten Hag than they were with Ole Gunnar Solskjær. So yes, they're both playing counter-attacking football, but it's 2 different, completely different levels of counter-attacking football with the structures behind it to be able to make those differences. And in the long run, as Manchester United pick up those structural ideas, they will get better and better.
And I think Ten Hag said after the game as well, when he spoke to, I think it was Sky Sports was on, wasn't it? He said how the pressing's improving. I'm paraphrasing him, but he said something like the pressing's improving, but the routines aren't perfect yet. So you can see they're learning how to do it. And if you got pressure from the front, then you can play a high line. If you don't have pressure from the front, then you have to drop deeper in different situations. We saw Arsenal's press is really, really well organised, and it works constantly. Like Jesus did so much running in that game. They must be knackered, but they seem to be like a really high fitness level, so they can pull it off. United will get better and better, but it'll take like a season and then a bit to be able to do this the way you want to do it, because you only can really work on that sort of stuff when you've got long training session periods to do it, and they've got a game every 3 days or something. So you have like match day +1 is going to be recovery, I guess. Then you'll maybe have a day of light training, which won't be intense pressing, and then it's very hard to coach that over the next few months before the World Cup.
Yeah,
the Sky interview is really worth listening to because he talks about so much of the tactics, and he makes a big thing about defensively saying that Manchester United were really good and were doing what he wanted them to do. And I think the phrase that he uses is we were able to keep them in the areas we wanted them to be in. We were able to keep them further away from the goal as well. And that's super important for what you're trying to do when you're playing against a team like Arsenal, who you know are going to control the ball a lot. If you can force them to be in areas where they aren't going to be able to make those sorts of incisions into your own final third.
And they were blocking the middle. It was blocking the middle was the thing they were doing.
Exactly.
And the one time that Arsenal got through that, I think the one time they really got through the middle was that lovely bit of skill from Odegaard where he double touches onto his right foot to fire it across McTominay. It's such a brilliant bit of skill just to win a little through ball opportunity. And that's the only time that Jesus was able to go through the middle, and then the ball drops, and that's how Saka ended up scoring.
I mean, Seb, we've heard that both teams played really well. I think that's fair to say. And we've heard about a couple of individual performances, but in particular from Gabriel Jesus and Marcus Rashford. How did you make of those performances? They were thrilling to watch, weren't they?
Yeah, no, sure. I feel like I'm learning a little bit about Jesus, which I didn't know before. I didn't realise that he's so strong on the ball. Like his ability to resist challenges and resist physical contact is amazing. And I don't know whether it was a product of the way he was used at City, but I don't feel like I saw him in the kind of areas which attract that much defensive attention before. It's hugely impressive. Rashford, I think, is just a good news story. I think there's a tendency when a player has a bad season over the summer to do little videos showing himself, in a Rocky montage, basically. And Rashford did much the same thing. There was stories of him training intensively, and I think in the United States. And this season so far, I don't think technically as a footballer he's quite where he was. I think you can see his mind working a little bit quicker. Like that little ball around the corner for Anthony. I think that's a situation maybe a year ago where the ball gets caught under his feet, or he doesn't see the option, or he tries to a little bit too hard to do something for himself, manufacture some kind of shooting position. But he, it's a nice ending to this story, actually. And it's funny that you have all of these players and all of these pieces put around someone like that. And the conversation heading into this season was, you've got the centre forward who's getting in the way, we can't get rid of because he earns too much money. Cavani's gone. Martial is injured. So you kind of have to depend on this reclamation project. And it's just really lovely to see him score what was ultimately the clinching goal. But I wonder, watching the game yesterday, like I wonder over time whether Rashford does become the better option just because of how you can mix and match those three front players. I don't think he's ever been a world-class forward. I don't think he's ever going to be someone who scores 30 goals a season. But the diversity in that United line makes it really interesting if you can keep him fit, I think.
I think he's best playing the out-to-in run. So on the left, probably left wing playing through, like, so he goes to the central space there. I can't see him as a striker. And I think it's very basic. But I think it's about just confidence. I think when he gets that through ball for the first goal he hits and he puts it across the keeper, it takes a deflection off one of the defenders, I think, that bounces over the goalie. I think the way he takes that touch, if he's confident, he pushes it further ahead of himself and then gets a really good drill on it. But instead, he takes it almost like, I cannot miss this, I can't miss this, rather than thinking I'm going to score, is what my weird like psych read of it is. But this is the thing, this guy's been not panned, but he's really struggled over the last while. Struggled to score. And when you start scoring, you start believing in yourself again, and you'll start seeing his natural touches and stuff coming more and more and more, and he'll become a better player. It's really hard. Like Maguire's devoid of confidence. He came on and was like, you put on like Mr. Blobby in the back of the team because he's crashing into things. Like a yellow card was one of his first tackles, and he looked really out of it. He could have given away a penalty and been booked as well again. Like later on in the game, that's confidence, I would have said.
Well, speaking of psychodrama, Seb, for Arsenal, in some ways, you'd think it's actually quite good for them to lose their 6th game after winning 5 in a row, because otherwise, I think supporters certainly I would think if I was an Arsenal supporter, are we going to win the league like undefeated? Are we going to have another invincible season? It's quite nice to be brought a little bit back down towards the floor, because it's clear they're going to do very well this season. And I think, knowing how big groups of supporters work, it's a little nicer to space out some of those return to earth moments, so that, halfway through the season, if you end up finishing 4th or 3rd, it doesn't feel like a massive failure versus what it should feel like, which could be a big success.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't think my opinion of Arsenal changed based on anything I saw yesterday. I thought they played pretty well. They conceded some bad goals, had some ugly moments, and like I think there is value to kind of having that sort of momentum checking moment. But then at the same time, I think I found it annoying. Arsenal played well. They did all the things that should have been enough to win the game, probably. And I think the only cloud on the horizon is you do all of these things well, and yet you still don't win. And you win because of you win in a way which is going to attract very familiar kind of criticism. So, for instance, like the second goal, was it the second goal with the square ball from Eriksen? The one where he goes through by himself. No, that's the third goal. Sorry,
the third goal.
That's the kind of moment where you think that's ridiculous, because that just shouldn't happen. That's a major defensive malfunction, essentially. And it becomes Arsenal have played really well and they deserve to be level, and then it becomes a mentality thing, and you get all the COD psychology and all that kind of stuff that washes back into the discussion. And that would really irritate me, because it kind of obfuscate all the things that have been done well this season, because it had nothing really to do with it. They just got done on Sunday. And it happens because it's football and that's the way of the game. But then, I don't know, like I think that good to be brought down to earth thing becomes something that fans say, I do all the time. It's a way of comforting yourself, isn't it? Be like, refocus, and we'll have a look at this, and make sure that everybody doesn't get carried away. But actually, I think one of the best things about Arsenal recently has been the fact that everyone has got carried away. Atmosphere at the Emirates is better. The confidence of these players is better.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And actually, for someone like Jesus, we've talked loads about him individually. I think it's made a huge difference to bring him into an environment where things are really positive, rather than the old Arsenal environment where you're never less than 45 minutes away from an absolute tantrum because something has gone wrong. Now, the atmosphere is, it's more conducive to someone living up to his billing and his transfer fee, I think. So,
well, I would say as well, I think a good indicator of where Arsenal are as a squad was just before the game in the huddle. You could see that at least when the cameras were filming, it was Zinchenko and Jesus who appeared to be the most vocal in that bubble ahead of a big game that presumably you would expect them, having played for Manchester City, would be much more used to than some of the Arsenal players. So let's not forget where they are in their cycle. Very positive for them. They're against Everton next weekend, I think. Everton, still the tough games come because, of course, Everton had a decent result in the Merseyside derby, which we'll be talking about immediately after this break. Delightful break that we had there. John Mackenzie, Everton 0. 0 Liverpool. Good result for Everton, you would say. Another troubling result for Liverpool.
Yeah, it's a case of the things that Liverpool struggling at through the season being something that they struggled at again in this game. I think credit where credit's due. Frank Lampard recognised the areas where Liverpool are struggling and made decisions to cause problems there. So we know that Liverpool are really dangerous in the wide areas. They were really, really dangerous front three in transition. They brought Darwin Núñez back in, and he's really dangerous space in front of him. He's a tall guy, but he's very quick and loves to just run through on the ball. And then you've got Diaz and Salah on the other side. So if you give any space in behind your defence for that front three, then you cause some problems. So if you're playing against Liverpool and you're not going to try and play them at their own game, you're going to sit a little bit deeper, and you've got to think, well, one, how do we stop just allowing them wave upon wave of pressure? But two, how do we get further down the field and cause problems ourselves? And I think that Everton did that well, because I noted in the video that I did, the video review, that when they were pushing forward, they were funneling Liverpool into the centre of the pitch. They were doubling up on Liverpool's dangerous wide players and allowing space for them to move into the centre of the pitch. And because Liverpool have got this injury crisis in midfield, they're not at their most creative in those central spaces. And yeah, it meant that they were able to cause Liverpool problems further up the pitch. But when Liverpool did get through, they weren't allowing their front three a huge amount of space and time on the ball, so they could drop back into a bit more of a lower block and cause some problems in that way. So yeah, it's the way that you cause Liverpool problems at the moment, and a lot of teams have realised that. And I think there's a lot of people saying, Liverpool have got injury issues, they're in a transition moment, etc. But I do think a lot of this comes down to the tactical realisation that there are things that you can do against Liverpool to cause some problems.
Well, I want to come to that, but before we do, I just want to ask Seb something about Everton. Seb, we had a conversation maybe, I guess, 3 weeks ago now, when the first game of the season and Alex Iwobi played in central midfield, which seemed a little unusual. You and I both thought he played quite well in that game. He's still there, and he's playing next to Onana now. He's doing quite well, isn't he? I just want to mention it because I feel like he's a bit of a figure of fun based on his transfer fee. But he's playing a position I never realised he could well.
Yeah, so after you and I spoke about that, I was talking to some Everton fans on Twitter, and they said, well, no, actually, he had a really good end to last season, and I'm sure he did. It's just, I think what's interested me this year is that kind of the tone of the way he plays and the speed with which he plays has changed. Like, I've always thought of Alex Iwobi as a very active, dynamic footballer, whereas now he's, especially with Onana coming to the team, he has to be almost the senior statesman, because Onana is learning the game at this level. He has not got a lot of, he had, I think, 18 months in France. Prior to that, he was in the Zweite Bundesliga here in Hamburg. So he's not an experienced guy, especially not in a Premier League situation. And so Iwobi finds himself in a kind of converted position, but also having to be setting the example and having to take ultimate responsibility for the department, which is really interesting for him. And I don't think he's turned into Moussa Dembele. I just think that he's been a lot better than I thought he was going to be. And actually, if you were to compile a list of things that have gone well for Everton this season, lack of goal scoring not on there, a few problems in attack, lack of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but you'd be hard-pressed to say that Iwobi doesn't deserve to be on that list, because he has exceeded expectation, and he's also allowed a little bit of stability to grow around him. I think both those fullbacks or wing-backs, when they play there, have been very, very... they didn't actually have the best game at the weekend, but generally they've been quite good. They've been positive and shown themselves to be upgrades. The defence has been better than I expected it to be. And if you're looking at the midpoint of your team... Yeah, absolutely. So yeah,
you can see him scoring goals.
Let's not over-egg it and proclaim him to be a world beater, but he's just
let's over-egg it, Seb. I want to. I like Mopé.
Do it.
I'll 7 eggs.
Yeah.
John, when it comes to Liverpool, we talked about the potential tactical limitations before. Let me ask you specifically with Darwin Núñez. Obviously a fantastic player, obviously going to score a barrel full of goals, as they say. But he is a different player to Roberto Firmino, and I think it takes a little bit of time for the other players around him and for the team as a whole to work out how to best utilise that, and how the sort of what's changed, I suppose.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit interesting to me that Liverpool went with someone like Núñez when a lot of the problems, to me, seem as though the sorts of problems that elite teams face when oppositions recognise that the best chance they have against them is to sit deep and try and hit them on the break, because that means that you get congested penalty boxes. It's all about trying to break down those low blocks, and obviously Darwin Núñez is going to offer you something as a penalty box threat because he's a tall guy, he's a good header of the ball. You've got Trent Alexander-Arnold who's going to play those whipped crosses into the back post from the right half space, and he will generate chances from there. But I felt as though in the game against Everton, he just wasn't offering a huge amount of upside. Like you do want to get a lot from him in terms of trying to get him into maybe even wide areas or central spaces, running through onto the ball and causing problems in that way. But you're just not going to find a huge amounts of those sorts of situations in Premier League games, I don't think. So actually midway through the game, Firmino was brought on and that made a huge difference. Now they kept Núñez on, but it meant that they now had someone who was a little bit more creative and able to drop into the space behind the striker and cause problems from there.
Can I ask you specifically though? Firmino was in real good form. Like in that 9-0 Bournemouth game, he was like sensational and is clearly at a good stride at the moment. Against Everton, I don't think anyone has to be a tactical genius to know that Everton were going to do what Frank Lampard did with them. So based on what you've just said, why didn't they start Firmino? I don't understand.
Yeah, and I suppose the big question there was like why? Because you can start Firmino just behind the striker, and that's how they played the second half of the game. But they went with Fabio Carvalho as an 8 rather than, I think with Firmino it's more like a 10. I guess they expected Lampard to push up the pitch and then open up space for them to be able to attack. And I guess if you spent that amount of money on a player as your star striker, you sort of have to start him. But in terms of why they went with Carvalho over...
I'm not saying it was the wrong decision. I'm just curious.
I think it probably was the wrong decision. I think when you look at the way that... I think after Firmino came on, they were a lot more incisive in the final third. And he was able to drop in, help out, move around, cause... problems with Everton's marking and etc. in a way that Carvalho wasn't.
That derby is also a bit nuts. So Everton will push far more in that sort of game at home than they ever would away. So you know that you can expect a different kind of Everton against you in that game. So then if they're going to push up, they're going to leave space in behind, which then you've got Núñez causing all the hassle. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and the game definitely opened out, I think. But the problem was then that actually rather than, and this is again something I pointed out in the video, like the problem is that in those situations when the game becomes transitional, you expect Liverpool to be the better team in those situations, but it turned out that Everton were causing the problem. So for the Mopé chance, which is the biggest chance of the game, Everton picked the ball up in their own penalty area and were able to play Onana to Gray to Mopé, and then they had something like a 4-on-3, 5-on-3 overload in an attacking transition, and Mopé probably should have scored. If he didn't score, there was 2 very easy options for tap-ins, square as well. They look like the more dangerous team, so there's definitely issues, I think, with Liverpool at the moment.
Well, issues beyond just what's happening on the pitch. Of course, there are lots of injuries as well, keeping certain players off the pitch. They did bring in Arthur Melo to play in the midfield, presumably. Did he come on in the game?
Didn't come on in the
game.
No, but he obviously he was only formalised 5 minutes before the game in order to be on the bench. So
is he going to help? The main thing every time I hear about Arthur, I think about the deal between Barcelona and Juventus.
Yeah.
Like that's my main association with him. But I've literally no idea how he
really hard
as a footballer
to read. But I mean, what Arthur gives you is he's a bit more of a metronomic player in midfield. So I think part of the problem that Liverpool have had is that when games do become transitional, they can lose control of the game a little bit in that sense, and he's someone like Thiago who's going to be able to pick the ball up and just play quick passes, manage the tempo, and he's also a fairly good ball carrier as well. So I think Yeah, he just offers something different, a bit more of a passing presence in the midfield, which Liverpool, I mean, we talk about it a lot, like the evolution of Liverpool's midfield, but if you look at some of the players that Liverpool have regularly played with in that midfield, then, this season they've had, I think, James Milner, Jordan Henderson and Harvey Elliott. I mean, Harvey Elliott's a great player, really like Harvey Elliott, but he is a youngster who they're trying to blood. He's the sort of player that you want to bring on late in games and get experience in that way. So I think bringing someone like Outtro in, regardless of the fact that there are questions about how high his level can be in European football, I still think that he will add something that they don't have in terms of profile.
Do you know what else offers something different? It's Scotland. Yeah. I mean, also what things like a free university if you're from there, and
lovely water,
lovely delicious water. Great Highland scenes. I mean, you get some of that elsewhere, but not quite like,
well, specifically in the Highlands.
They film all the Travis music videos there, I've heard. And anyway, also they do Celtic
haggis.
4 haggis. Yeah. No, I wasn't going for stereotypes.
Celtic 4 haggis nil.
Celtic 4 nil Rangers, not haggis, but Rangers. That sounded like a big game. And also we talk about these two teams, JJ, because I believe for the first time in many a yonder, they're both in the Champions League group stages, so it's literally impossible to escape.
This derby was
not. You still don't have to watch them.
Yeah, well, this derby was brilliant. I used to hate watching the Old Firm games. I didn't care because they basically ruin the league for everyone who doesn't support them. Because you just can't beat them. You can't over leagues. You can beat them one off. Sometimes in the cup if you're lucky, but mostly they're going to win everything.
Like me and you in a race.
Which exactly, because I would win that every time, so there's no chance for you. We already know that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, there was an interesting thing when Steven Gerrard had a conversation, I think, with Gary Neville on his YouTube, I think, and he talked about how the Glasgow derby is far more like scary and big than Liverpool Everton games. Right. I was watching Liverpool Everton at the same time as watching this one. This one was amazing. Like the energy, the atmosphere, the aggression. It was so much more. What happens
when Celtic win, or one of the teams wins 4-0 in that derby? Is it?
You take it as a big hit. That's a big hit for Rangers, and the way they won it was by being more intense. Rangers came to try and, I think, slow them down, stop them from playing, but you can't really do it. Celtic Park is full, the noise is amazing, and then it's just energy. Ali McCoy is pointing out how the ball boys were even involved. So whenever the ball went out to play, they immediately threw it back. And you can see from loads of set plays that there's one of the goals that Celtic score is they give the ball away, Rangers walk and they're slow, trying to play at their pace, but Celtic immediately put the ball down, hand on it, kick it, goes forward, always forward, and then they're able to score. Just from this was Rangers trying to adjust back into their shape because they're trying to play it as an away team and trying to slow it down. But whereas you might be able to, Liverpool might be able to try and slow down Everton and take the bite out of the fans in that sort of game, you can't do it in Celtic and Rangers games. Right. You just can't. It's kind of crazy. As for how they'll do in the Champions League, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the question here from Hankles is Rangers and Celtic both being in the Champions League good for Scottish football or not? Can I actually just put a little plug in for the Athletic Football Podcast at this point, because I listened to an episode of theirs last week with Mark Chapman, had Matt Slater and Phil Buckingham from the Athletic on. They talked about the Champions League and the broadcasting revenue and the impact that it has on some of the mid-tier European leagues as opposed to the top ones. So the example they gave was like the Danish league with Copenhagen, who are in it every year. And as a result of that, the gap between them and everyone else in the league is enormous because of the revenue that they bring in. So I guess in a sense, having Celtic and Rangers both in it is good for the league insofar as it maintains a bit of equity between those teams, but it's still bad for the league overall, would you say?
So this is a complicated one. So it's good for the league in that it then makes them interesting to watch, so you can potentially get a higher sale value for your TV rights for the league. Yeah, which is then, I don't remember exactly how that's distributed, but basically...
So one of the things I said on this Athletic podcast was that an issue with leagues where there's one or two really good teams at the top and everyone else is rubbish is that they might have decent domestic deals, but nobody wants to watch them internationally because it's not competitive.
No, well, that's the exact problem. I mean, you think in the La Liga, people only really want to watch Real and Barcelona, kind of thing. I mean, Germany's got a problem with Bayern winning all the sort of time. Mm-hmm. Celtic won 9 in a row, Rangers came back, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The money difference between Celtic and Rangers it's not even, you can hardly even explain it. It's like trying to see if we had our race, which we're going to do one day, it's like if you then tried to race me while in a car. Yeah. It's that different. I can't beat you.
I'd still win. Yeah.
So you might, like, occasionally, if we did 100 races, you might not be able to turn the car on from the start or do the ignition.
I think
right?
I could turn a car on.
Right, and I might get
times.
another thing, right? So you might get the ignition. What doesn't work? You're like, oh no!
I haven't got a driving license. So
I know
maybe
this.
once in every 100 times, a police officer would prevent me from driving.
Well, and then in this analogy, you're doing the ignition. I get a head start. I run. It's a 100-meter race, and I get so far, and then suddenly the ignition goes on, and even though I'm close to the top, you still beat me anyway because you've got all that extra power.
Do you know what I'd do?
No.
In race number 1, I'd just mow you down, and then you wouldn't be able to race.
Well,
the
I
other
think you're going to
99.
try and do that in our foot race anyway.
Oh, I'm going to mow you down.
No,
for
I'm
sure.
fully aware, but I think I'll be. It doesn't matter anyway. So in terms of the league, I think it's awful. Do I think it's awful? I don't know. I don't know what I think. So I think I support Aberdeen. That's my team. Lots of other people support other teams. Rangers and Celtic are not the only two teams in that league. But there is no point ever. Just like abandon all hope now. If you support anyone else apart from the old firm, they'll never win the league again. No one will ever win that league other than those two. This is where the Super League becomes a thing that's already happened. Because in every domestic league around, you've got Copenhagen winning there all the time. It occasionally changes hands. Like in France, you had Monaco and Lille won, right? So it can happen. Leicester won it in England.
Yeah.
But the majority of the time, it's going to look like, if you look through the Wikipedia, who's won the title since like 1960, it's only Rangers or Celtic.
Well, I like it that way, and I think that people who've had stuff before should still have it now.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
The only plus point to them being in there is if they do well and they get some draws and some wins, then the coefficient points you get for Champions League is really high.
Yeah.
So when Rangers did very well in the Europa League, I think Celtic were okay recently as well. But Rangers were in the final last season, right? So that really helps your coefficient. It really pushes it up. And that means if you finish third or fourth, you get into Europe. But the amount of money that the rest of Scotland makes is so small that you see it like Hearts were in Europe. It's basically everyone gets put out of it almost immediately.
Yes.
It's what happens. Like Aberdeen didn't finish third last season, which is where they tended to be for the last few. As a result of that, now no longer in Europe, Aberdeen would be in the best position probably because of the funding they're doing to be able to do something there, but they're not going to do it now. And then it's just pointless. You get into Europe to the qualifying rounds, you're out by June or July. The entire season is pointless.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely useless. And so it's good for Rangers and Celtic fans. It's good that it's kind of good seeing them. But the thing is, they might play, Rangers are playing Liverpool and Napoli, right? So they're playing them, and then they're going to turn up. They're playing Aberdeen on Saturday.
Yeah.
Aberdeen might get a result out of them. They might get a 2-2 or something like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because they will finish 20 points off them at the end of the season.
Yeah. That's bad, isn't it? Brighton Hove Albion 5. That was a real yawn. It wasn't in response to you. I'm tired. I stayed up playing video games again. Got to stop doing that. Brighton and Hove Albion 5, Seb. 2 Leicester City. Brendan Rodgers, I believe Leicester have 1 point from 6 games now. It's really not very good at all, is it?
You know what it is, Joe? It's like over the last 18 months, so wherever you start your Brendan Rodgers and Leicester decline point, the mistakes and the errors and the goals conceded look really, really, really similar during that time. We've talked about kind of their issues at set pieces before, but this is a separate issue. Like, there are moments during games, and the Brighton game was a good example of this, where nobody ever seems to learn anything from what happens. So if you see the goal that Leandro Trossard scored to put Brighton 3-2 up, 5 minutes later, exactly the same situation develops in exactly the same part of the pitch, and the overload is exactly the same, and the same fullback is isolated in exactly the same way. And if you can find that moment, I think that's really descriptive of where Leicester are. Like, it looks like a playing staff and a coaching staff who don't really belong together anymore because one has phased the other out, tuning the other out. They've got bored of each other. I don't know in what form that parting should take place. Like, obviously it's a lot harder to get rid of players than it is just a head coach. I also think Brendan Rodgers is quite a good coach, and
Sure.
he just seems to have this. He seems to have a shelf life beyond which he can't arrest a decline. But it must be so dispiriting. I was following our good friend Ali Clarkson on Twitter. Good friend Ali, who is also a Leicester City fan, and he seems utterly sick of it. And we all know Ali, very even-tempered person.
It's hard to get Ali sick of anything.
Exactly that. And
apart from food poisoning.
Well, what was very
It must be
strange.
awful for you being able to hear your own bad jokes back again in your own ear.
It is taking some of the wind out from underneath my wings, yeah.
I think if you can find them, and if nothing has changed between us recording this and releasing the podcast, Brendan Rodgers' quotes after the game were very, very strange. Went down a kind of Scott Parkerish route in terms of discussing club atmosphere. He talked fairly disparagingly about the activity which has taken place over the summer and the lack of reinforcements. And that's not something that you say if you're in fear of being dismissed. You're kind of encouraging people to kind of hit back at you a little bit. But performance-wise, they are dreadful, which is very strange because it's like a mind trick because you see all these good players on the pitch, even just in midfield. So Cowan Hall and Maddison and Tielemans and Harvey Barnes has had injuries, but he's coming back into a little bit of form. Ndidi is in the heart of midfield as well. So you see all these players and you think, you're really good. I didn't hear that.
Oh, sorry. Ndidi's been playing at centre-back recently.
No, but he's on the pitch, JJ, which is like, usually with Leicester, previously at least, when Ndidi was gone, the whole system seemed to collapse. And so, okay, you have to move him on the pitch and you have to change players' roles a little bit, but you still have the quality of player on the pitch that means that it shouldn't look like this. Like, there are a few excuses.
That's a huge thing, though, Seb. Like, because you're right, Ndidi is hugely important. So the midfield that Rodgers came into, when he came into Leicester, they had a really good team. They had Vardy, who was playing very well, and he scored a lot of goals last season as well, right? So he's still a good player. But you had Ndidi anchoring the midfield, and then you had Tielemans, who I really rate as a player, good kind of captain leader, makes things happen in the big games. He's a big game player. And you had James Maddison doing well. Maddison looked absolutely hopeless against Brighton, giving the ball away. And I think Matchday 2 did it really well on Sunday night, talking about how you can see players shouting at each other. But if you put Ndidi into, the problem they've got is they had Fofana, they're playing a back four, they've got Evans as one of the centre-backs, Ndidi's a centre-back, he's not a centre-back, and not only does that make you worse at that one position, and in the Premier League that's a huge thing to have one position weak, it also weakens your entire structure of your midfield. In comes Soumare, who is not as good in the midfield, he's just not as good a player, and then suddenly that's kind of weak. And then Rodgers is tweaking things to try and work it. Like, he's always liked playing a diamond over time. And he often plays a diamond midfield either with a back three or a four. He's playing something like it. He started with two strikers in this game. Daka and Iheanacho were starting in this game here. Just trying to get something to make it work. But you've got Barnes and Maddison as the two wide players. He doesn't really have any wingers. So he's missing wingers. You want to play a 4-3-3, you need wide wingers who can either come inside the pitch or can hold the line. It doesn't happen. So he's missing
Harvey Barnes more so than James Maddison.
He can do it, yeah, but then you're missing the other side as well. So then you work out how you block the pitch, and you've got Justin and Thomas, who are both young. They're all right. They'll be quite good going forward in the future. You got Danny Ward replaced in goal. Then you got Daniel Amartey who comes into defence. I don't rate him as a centre back either. They don't seem to trust Sionchu anymore, and I can see why. He made loads of mistakes, but you lose the leadership from that whole dressing room. Kasper Schmeichel's gone. Wes Morgan is gone. Christian Fuchs. These were the guys who were the captains and the leaders that fostered that team spirit that made them so good in the past. When you lose that from the dressing room, it's incredibly hard to try and make a team be competitive. Like, Tielemans will be a leader. He's captain. I think it was Anderlecht who was captain of, wasn't he, when he was younger? They've got that, but then they're missing like Johnny Evans as well. But you're missing that big power vacuum. So he's gone, stripped out of it. There's a big absence, and he's not had the chance to bring anyone in who can do that. And the transfers he has brought in haven't all been amazing, and their recruitment has been none. Like, they bought in Wout Faz. I don't know who he's like, Seb, so I couldn't tell you.
I don't know anything about the new centre half they signed, but like Morgan and Fuchs, like, big leadership for it, but they've been gone for years now. Also, like, recruitment this summer has also been a problem because they've got that situation with bringing new sporting director in from Southampton, but he couldn't start work until after the transfer window is finished. But then, like, if you look at the players that he's brought in over the past 12 to 18 months, and the lack of production that's been produced from them. So Soumare is a good example. I don't think Soumare quite deserved the reputation he had on arriving in England, but nevertheless, he was signed for quite a lot of money, and Rodgers seemed to have given up on him ahead of this season starting. There was talk of him going back on loan to France or being sold outright back into Ligue 1. Dennis Pratt was another. Daka, I think, is a good player, but you haven't seen a lot of Daka. I think the failure to move on from Jamie Vardy, like, I don't really agree. I don't think Jamie Vardy is still a good player. Like, I think he's an okay one. I think he's shot it. I think he'll still score potentially 10 goals a season, but it's kind of interesting that over the weekend Vardy was left out, and that doesn't feel like necessarily a tactical decision because, like you, JJ, like, in a time like this, you want a character in your first 11 and you want someone that's been there for a long time. You want someone that's been there and done a lot of things for that group of supporters. And the last manager that kind of picked a fight with Jamie Vardy did not end on the right side of that argument. So it's a tricky one. But then I think this has to be this is why it feels like it's reached the end of its coaching journey, just because he's not extracting as much out of these players. And there have been a lot of players, a lot of talent that's come through Leicester in the last couple of years since he got there. A lot of money spent, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a situation where Rodgers gets shot into the sun, must never work for another club again. It's just the end of this particular cycle at Leicester, because for a long time it went very, very well. His only failure really was to get, I think we talked about this earlier, but to get over the line at the right moment, which would have kind of uncorked the money.
I feel like he came in though, Seb, and there was so much potential for them to go on to be much better, and they haven't really got the investment and the recruitment right, and that's where the real problems come. Like Vardy scored 15 goals last season in the Premier League. That's really good. But the thing with Vardy is he hardly touches the ball. Like, he'll have the fewest touches of any player. Like, goalkeepers have more than them every game. Because he's very efficient with it, but then you don't get enough out of him otherwise. And if you want to play a style of play where you can have the front man linking, then you can't have that. And so maybe he's saying there's a lack of dialogue between the midfield and the forward, and that's why he's taken Vardy out. It might be one of the reasons he's done that, to try and get that in. It might be something else. But like, that is the real problem for me. And if you get rid of Rodgers now, like, bear in mind that this guy is a really top coach. His Celtic team was so good. He almost won the league with Liverpool. Like, he knows exactly what he's doing. And maybe the thing that he's not strongest at as a manager is managing the dip that comes mentally after a good season, because like Liverpool had that bad season after they've almost finished second, wasn't it? They had a bit of a dip.
I'd like to hear John, because I feel like I'm very interested in the two sort of separate angles to this. But John, can you give us a little bit of flavour, add a bit of spice to the pan? Yeah,
I feel like you know the meme with a guy in a hot dog suit, where it's like we're trying to find the guy who did that.
Tim Robinson.
Yeah. I feel like that's almost how I feel about Brendan Rodgers here, because like the drop off that Leicester have had has been so big. And we were talking earlier this morning, I think, about obviously Brendan Rodgers did really well. They nearly made the Champions League on a couple of occasions, but to go from that to then this situation where it just feels hopeless at Leicester. They don't have the squad there. They aren't getting results. Everything seems to be a mess. I think that has to be on him in some form. This isn't just, okay, we had a couple of seasons where we didn't finish in the Champions League and we've dropped down into the mid-table. This is like proper panning form. 1
point after 6 games.
Yeah, it's bad, and there's no sense in which, you know, that they've managed the squad well, and obviously that the recruitment department are responsible for that as well, and the ownership are responsible for that as well. But this has all been done on his watch, and I think there are certain signs, I think, that I've seen in recent seasons that Brendan Rodgers' approach is maybe not as useful as it once was. I've watched him a lot in the Premier League, and it feels as though he's had sort of like two systems. He has a kind of like attacking system when they're away from home, when they're at home, and they have a more defensive system when they're at home. And he just seems to go, oh well, we'll play this way away from home, this way at home, and if it doesn't work, we'll just switch to the other system. And it feels as though it's becoming tired out, and that he maybe doesn't. I mean, he obviously has the ability to build like a high possession team. He obviously did well at Celtic, although interestingly, a lot of my friends who are Celtic fans do talk about how he was really fun at first, but in the seasons that followed that, it just became a bit too boring and a bit too, you know, possession for the sake of possession, and yet they still, because obviously Rangers had dropped away at that time, they were able to carry on those runs. But I see him as being like a solid manager, but I feel as though now the league is getting more competitive. You have to be more than just a solid manager, and I think the way that Leicester have gone maybe points.
Do you think it's kind of worrying?
Last words on Rodgers here, please, guys. We've got to move on, but you go quickly.
Yes,
one sentence, Seb, and then we'll get one sentence from JJ, and then I'll decide who the winner is.
It's a really long one.
It feels worrying how many players have either plateaued or stagnated or regressed under Rodgers.
Great sentence.
Lately.
Moving on. No, okay. I'm teasing you, Seb. Go on.
It's just it's not a symptom of health, is it? If you think about the kind of the market value of someone like Ndidi a couple of years ago, Tielemans, we know is a good player, but with a few flaws. Maddison, I don't know. But like, it's interesting also that some of these players don't want to be there. Like, you've won an FA Cup and you've been within touching distance of the Champions League, and Tielemans wants to go to Arsenal. Understand wanting to go to Arsenal now, but from quite early, late in sort of the new year, that seemed to become his sort of his direction of travel. It's a weird atmosphere, like when you've got players. Maddison seemingly wanted to play for Newcastle. Don't know, but that's kind of what was reported in various places. That doesn't feel like a group who particularly believe in the direction they're headed under a manager. That's all.
I think the key to managers' success is recruitment, and that's the only way they get better. They haven't had any, and that's why they're weaker now than they were before. And if you look at this season they've had so far, they've played Arsenal, who look amazing. They lost to them. They've lost to Southampton, which is not great. Then they played Chelsea and Man United, and Brighton are excellent as well. All really difficult games so far that you could easily see them losing over the course of a season. Only 6 games in, I could easily see them getting points out of Villa and Spurs. It's a thing they could do at some point, and then it all reverses and it changes back to them being okay. But the thing I would say to finish off on Rodgers is that, well, he's done well in the league in the past and whatever. When you remember like the weaknesses he had, he was good at Celtic. This team won 69 games in a row or something, or didn't lose 69 games. Sorry, that would be crazy. But in Europe, they were not very good. So they really struggled. And then with Liverpool, when he got into the Champions League, again, wasn't very good. He was resting key players.
He kind of
games,
threw that
wasn't
Champions
really
League group, didn't he? When in Liverpool, yeah, that was
so
weird.
like. Maybe there is something to him where he's not quite able to get to that next top level. And he was, when he came in at Leicester, he was at exactly the right level for them and could make them play really well. And they played nice football, but without the recruitment to make them better, and maybe he's not the right manager to take them to that level.
But hasn't he had the recruitment?
Hey, you're done. Do you want to hear my take?
Yeah.
Since watching Arsenal's All or Nothing series and being reminded of what it's like to be a human being, I think it's impossible to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So let's forget about it. And a few comments now. Steve Hankey giving me a quizzical look there. How dare you look at me that way, Steve Hankey? I'm not your pet. But Steve Hankey, thanks. You have put in these helpful comments from the listeners here for us to finish this week's episode. A few comments from listeners, John, talking about you. Very exciting, isn't it?
I like to see this as me winning the battle of John versus Joe.
Well, in a way, it sort of is, yeah.
Be vanquished.
Each day you encroach further and further across my Rubicon, John, yes? Anyway, fine. Here's one from Daniel Mandich. Daniel Mandich says, I liked John ever since he arrived on Tifo, but after this Fredo bit, I now know he has the chaotic potential I was hoping for, and I absolutely love him. That's sucking up too much, isn't it? Come on, Daniel.
Step too far.
But I love
Daniel.
Daniel Mandich. I love you back.
Here's another one. Max Wellstar. I'd like to add my voice in support of the Fredo discussion. Not only do I welcome the Fredo discussion, but I would invite the Tifo Football Podcast in going further in implementing a policy of only ever discussing the value of footballers in Fredos. Max Wellstar. No. Darren Malone says, came to find out how Seb's gates were and left with a deeper appreciation for Zinedine Zidane's value. Yes.
Who was that?
Darren Malone.
Oh, no. The player you...
Zinedine Zidane.
Ah, yes.
What did I say?
Roughly that.
Yeah.
It's because I can hear my voice in my ear. It's so off-putting.
Especially with Zinedine Zidane, it's like a name that if you hear it while you're saying it,
is.
makes
It would be like
when you were saying
band?
I before in the middle of a sentence, your I and your echo I joined up for one mega I, and it was a glorious moment. The sort of middle I.
You know the band Dan and Aykroyd or Dan and Aykroyd?
Yes.
So you could have Zinedine and
Zinedine. Yeah, that sounds like a good band. And Jeebus here. Read the Fredo investment. On eBay, there is a Fredo from 1998, original RRP 10p, 10 pence, of course, on sale for £100. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? And Jeebus says, chop that price down a bit, and let's say you sell 20-year Fredos for £50, and you'll make a number that I can't possibly read aloud on the podcast.
I feel like that echoing in your ear trying to say that number would probably blow your synapses.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there we go. That's the end of today's podcast. Thanks to everybody for their participation. Sebastian Stafford-Bloor, Auf Wiedersehen.
Well, no, because we're going to see each other again. Auf Wiedersehen's a bit more of a long-term goodbye, so we'll just do a tschüss.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Wiedersehen.
John Mackenzie.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye. And, of course, JJ Bull the Bullet. Forgot your name then. Well done to you.
Wacky comment.
Yes. JJ.
Bird noise.
JJ, Jamie. There's too many people here. Jamie, the producer, thank you. And of course to Hankles, dropping in here and making my days so good. And to whoever stole my laptop charger over the weekend. Yeah? I'm going to find you. I got no respect here. I got no respect. People take my laptop charger every day.
You get no respect.
I'm the boss. I get no respect. People just take my stuff. What do you do? Mother? How do I have authority, Mother? How do I have authority?
For
Anyway,
anyone
my
who doesn't know
laptop's
Joe
gonna
very
die,
well, this is
so-
borderline real at the moment.
Someone else has encroached on his Rubicon, I'm afraid.
That's the end now. Bye.